This word, as you saw, was the word sabbatismos, which we haven't defined just yet. But whatever this sabbatismos is, we know that it remains, or it continues unchanged in place, form, or condition, according to Webster's dictionary. So, whatever this sabbatismos is, it's clear that it has not gone away. Now, if we're in agreement, at least at this point, let's take a look and see what the definition is of the word sabbatismos.
The Launida, number 6544, defines sabbatismos as Sabbath rest, Sabbath observance. The Liddell Scott, number 36978, defines the word sabbatismos as a keeping of days of rest. Thayer's lexicon, number 4520, defines it as a keeping or continuing and enduring Sabbath. The Ardent and Gingrich, a Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament, defines the sabbatizo, which is a variation of sabbatismos, defines it as to keep the Sabbath. The Greek-English lexicon of the Septuagint also defines sabbatizo as to keep Sabbath, to rest.
Now, many of you out there probably just noticed something unusual, that it's unusual at least as far as my presentations are concerned. As many of you know, in my videos I often reference the Strong's Concordance pretty much exclusively when I'm defining words, but you'll notice I didn't do that this time, that I didn't use it to define the word sabbatismos. You might ask, why not? Well, because I believe that when it comes to this word, sabbatismos, that the ramifications are so compelling that the editors of the Strong's Concordance are being a bit disingenuous. Allow me to explain my position here. Now, you'll recall earlier, and I hope maybe you wrote this down possibly, or at least made mental note of it, that I used the Strong's Concordance to define the word catapausis.
Here is catapausis, Strong's 2663, just as we saw earlier. And again, if you would focus in on definition 2a, metaphorically it means the heavenly blessedness in which God dwells, and of which he has promised to make persevering believers in Christ partakers after the toils and trials of life on earth are ended.
Now, if you're wondering where I got that particular definition for catapausis, I did take a screen print of a website called the Blue Letter Bible, and it utilizes the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, and you will see where I found that definition. I'll go ahead and put that up.
Here's the screen print that I got from the website Blue Letter Bible, and you'll see that this is where my definition comes from for catapausis. As you can see, definition 2a is word for word exactly what I read to you just a moment ago.
Now, bearing that in mind, I would invite you at this time, if you have a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, to go ahead and grab that, or if you have the new Strong's Complete Dictionary of Bible Words.
This is the new Strong's Complete Dictionary of Bible Words that I'll be using in the next slide to show how Strong's is altering the definitions of some key words that we're finding in this particular passage. Like I said, this is one of the ones that's in my library. You might have one that's a little different. In the upper picture, we see that the definition for sabbatismos is essentially the same that we just read a moment ago for catapausis. It is showing that the definition of sabbatismos is the repose of Christianity as a type of heaven or rest. Now, that runs completely different than what we've seen in all of the other translations of sabbatismos. So it's kind of strange that the Strong's Dictionary here would substitute a different definition. Likewise, when we look at the second picture there at the bottom of the slide, we see the definition for the word catapausis, and we see that this now has a slightly new definition that makes no reference whatsoever to what it did earlier. And this definition, as you can read there, is reposing down, abode, rest. I've read some definitions where it said a place of aboding or a resting place to abode. But I do find it really strange how the Strong's, the recent Strong's concordances and dictionaries have completely went off on their own and departed from what the regular verified translations of these words actually are.
Now, I'll leave it up to you to make up your own mind as to why the editors of the Strongs might do something like that. I'm not making any accusations or pointing fingers, just merely pointing out a discrepancy in their own sets of definitions. Now, again, I use the Strong's lexicon extensively, and I do find it adequate in the majority of my studies. But I would caution all serious Bible students, you don't always want to stick with just one reference. You always want to use more than one reference whenever you're defining the words that are used in the passage. It's just a very wise thing to do. Now, at this point, I would like to take a look at some of the other Bible translations of Hebrews 4, verse 9, and see if these other translations will render this word sabbatismos a little more accurately.
The John Wycliffe version reads, "Therefore the Sabbath is left to the people of God." The Bible in Basic English reads, "So that there is still a Sabbath keeping for the people of God." The American Standard Version, "There remaineth therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God." Darby's translation, "There remains then a Sabbatism to the people of God." The English Standard Version renders it this way, "So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God." The New Jerusalem Bible renders Hebrews 4:9 in this way, "There must still be therefore a seventh-day rest reserved for God's people." The NRS translates it, "So then a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God." The NIRV, "So there is still a Sabbath rest for God's people." The NIV, "There still remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God." HCSB, "A Sabbath rest remains therefore for God's people." The NET, "Consequently a Sabbath rest remains for the people of God." And finally the MRD, "Therefore it is established that the people of God are to have a Sabbath."
So now we have the meaning of the word sabbatismos, and we see that it remains or continues for the people of God. So at this point, you have to kind of ask yourself, if you consider yourself one of the people of God, well, then this verse is speaking directly to you. Now, even the Christian scholar, Cyrus Ingersoll Schofield, recognized the true meaning of sabbatismos. Bibles that use the Schofield study system will have a note right there next to Hebrews 4:9, and it says, according to the Schofield reference notes, rest or keeping of a Sabbath. So we have to understand that the word sabbatismos in ancient Greek literature is always 100% of the time referring to seventh-day Sabbath keeping. It's derived from the verb form sabbatizo, which means to keep the Sabbath. These all come, of course, from the primitive Hebrew word Shabbat, which literally refers to a day of rest or rest. The weekly Sabbath was not suspended, as we now see, until we're in the new earth, as some believe, for the verse specifies that sabbatismos still remains, and that believers need to labor to enter into it. Now, one thing, of course, that is abundantly clear is for those who believe that there is no Sabbath for New Covenant believers, well, we now have and can see that there is a direct, unambiguous statement of fact from the New Testament that there is a Sabbath. How does one get around that fact? What logic is being employed to say that there is no Sabbath when the writer of Hebrews directly affirms that there is? Now, I'll let that question kind of sink in nice and deep for you while we move on.